Berkeley SSB tax, a before and after study, changes in prices, sales, consumer spending, and beverage consumption 1 year after a tax on SSBs in Berkeley, California.
Nowadays, we all like to consume various beverages that include certain amounts of sugars in them. A good example of these drinks would be Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Fanta. However, if we face the reality, they are actually quite unhealthy because of the amount of the sugar that it includes in them and also some ingredients. And there are obviously various speculations on what to do about this. Berkeley, California is one of the first main US locales that effectively put considerable extra charge on the SSB merchants. To give a brief explanation on how this works, one bottle of Coca-Cola, if it would cost before tax $1, it now costs $1.68, $1.44, depending on the Aussie that they kind of was sold.
Now I'm going to talk about the Excel findings of before and after comparison of retail prices. So in the first Excel, we can see that the number of observations for December 2014 and June 2015 are very similar. Also, the biggest percentage change of story type that occur before and after the implication of taxes is story type 1. For Excel 2 and 3, the number of taxed and non-taxed beverages in both months are very similar. And for the Excel 4, for December 2014 and June 2015, the highest number of observations was the soda type, whereas the lowest number of observations was sport diet. This might be because most famous beverage types have a higher chance of being in a higher number of shops. In this slide, we can observe a pattern for large supermarkets and pharmacies. Taxed beverages are more expensive than non-taxed. This is because the average price for taxed beverages was higher than what it was for non-taxed ones. Also, there has been an increase in the average price for both taxed and non-taxed. So despite taxes, we can observe that there is an increase in the overall prices. Researchers found that sugary drink sales volume in Berkeley stores dropped to 9.6%, while in stores outside Berkeley, sales volume rose to 6.9%. Taxed beverage sales volume rose to 3.5%. in Berkeley stores versus only 0.5% in stores outside Berkeley. Sales of plain water in particular increased to 15.6% in Berkeley compared to a 4.4% drop in neighborhood cities. Overall, beverage sales, regardless of taxes, increased slightly in both Berkeley and non-Berkeley stores.
Researchers chose suitable comparison stores due to the fact that in order to accurately define whether differences in the mean prices can be attributed to the tax policy characteristics of non-Berkeley stores to Berkeley stores, most components need to be similar. Non-tax goods outside Berkeley are cheaper than those in Berkeley, thus telling us that the price difference will be present regardless of a tax policy. After a tax is implemented, the difference in price between both regions stays more or less the same. However, this deduction has changed by 2015 as the difference between the prices of taxed goods inside Berkeley significantly increased than those outside Berkeley. The time trends between taxed and non-taxed goods in Berkeley mirror each other with the same throw in November 2014. This price trends with non-tax goods and tax goods outside of Berkeley are also similar. From the data provided, we can conclude that the sugar tax has definitely had an effect on goods prices. In order to calculate the effect of the tax by subtracting the differences in price before the tax by the difference in price before the tax. Difference in prices before taxes in Berkeley and outside Berkeley was of 69 cents, and the difference in prices after taxes in Berkeley was outside of $1.23. This calculation shows that the increase in overall prices after the policy was implemented. Based on the p-value, we can say that the mean of both regions' prices after the tax policy implemented are the same. Because the p-value for sugary drinks is very small, it is unlikely that we would see a difference in the population means of the two groups. However, the tax on sugary drinks has had a present effect on prices in both regions. Based on the figure above, the consumption behavior has altered in the sense of caloric intake. On taxed beverages, caloric intake has decreased by 6.4 kilocalories. However, the tax policy has increased the caloric intake on non-taxed beverages as it has increased by 31.9 kilocalories. That may be because there's an alternative good that may be a better option for the consumer, as they don't want to purchase the non-taxed item. However, other than caloric intake, the p-values for the other data points remain large. This may be because sugary drinks are an inelastic product, meaning that a change in price will relatively have a low change in quantity demanded because of the habit that has been instilled in societal diet for a long time. One of the limitations is the effect of an external event that can play a role in the data points that are irrelevant to what we are studying, matters in the pestle factors that we cannot control. Other limitation is that the sample size for the data collected is small relative to what it is supposed to be in order to diminish as much as possible standard error. Therefore, we should take this into account while going through with our hypotheses. And another limitation that is important to take note of is that maybe some data points were affected in anticipation of the tax policy being implemented as well. If I was the authority that is responsible for conducting my own sugar tax experiment, I would firstly hold the control groups constant, needing to make sure that people from inside Berkeley do not go outside to purchase. That factors such as political events or pandemics don't play a role in my findings. I would also use a larger sample size to reduce errors. And most importantly, is keeping the tax policy private until publication date. If people are aware of it beforehand, some local businesses might want to relocate outside the tax zone, and other alternatives could disrupt my data.
So to give explanation on the actual experiment, originally the plan for the tax to be passed was for San Francisco. However, the fact that San Francisco is one of the major cities and one of the biggest cities in the United States could cause certain problems by passing this tax. Therefore, it was chosen to do in a smaller town, aka the Berkeley, to see how it would affect. And after passing the tax, it was found out that the consumption and the sales were actually quite not affected by the tax. However, it was actually quite a positive thing to pass this tax, and most of the people were actually quite happy with this idea. And this was actually not the original plan for the government, since they actually were against it. Yet the success was the reason that Philadelphia actually passed this tax as well. And if you take a look at these pictures, there were the meetings and etc. Differences. If you take a look at these pictures, you see that on the left side, the people are actually quite pro for this tax. They want this tax to be passed. Whereas on the right side, you see that they're not quite actually they're actually against it. This is due to, and the reason why people were actually pro this tax, because USA is one of the biggest countries that has large numbers of diabetes, and one of the reasons for diabetes is actually this sugar sweetened based merchants. about the conditional mean, if you take a look at this graph, on top you will be able to see the price change between December 24, which was around 1 of passing this tax, and March 2016, which is around 3. And on bottom it is stated the price change between December 21st for 2014, again round 1, and June 2015, which is actually round 2.
There are several intriguing points for us to discuss regarding this classic pair 2 sample hypothesis testing study conducted in Berkeley, California. It's obvious enough to see a drop in sugary drink consumption in the community. However, is this result good enough for us to conclude that all US cities respond to the implementation of the SSB tax similarly as how Berkeley did? Perhaps the answer is no, because there are several limitations and drawbacks, and let's discuss them. First of all, I will have to say that Berkeley is not the best representative because it's a fairly high educated community. Therefore, the consumer behavior there cannot actually reflect the typical sugary drink consumption in the nation. Second, the population size of Berkeley, just over 116,000, and the sample size of this study, which is 26 Berkeley stores, inevitably contributed to a higher sampling error. Imagine if San Francisco was the experiment city, the result would have been more accurate due to its large, diverse population with a higher percentage of low-income group. Last but not least, it's actually kind of hard to measure the actual effectiveness of the SSB tax since there's no comparison. In this case, Berkeley was the only chosen city. If neighboring cities in the Bay Area like Oakland, Albany, Sacramento, Marin County were also added to the experiment, we could have discovered more valuable insights. By doing a pair 2 sample hypothesis testing for each city first, then running ANOVA analysis and post hoc, we can better understand the pre-tax and post-tax difference. As a result, we don't have enough evidence to say that the SSB tax is the only factor that caused the decline in sugar and drink consumption in Berkeley. Yet, we can't overlook the positive things that came with the SSB tax in Berkeley. Now let's see the follow-up. 3 years later, residents in Berkeley area reported drinking 52% fewer servings of sugary drinks than they did before the tax was passed in November 2014. It's super cool that there is a research team from UC Berkeley led by a student called Madsen documenting the long-term impacts of a soda tax on drinking habits in the United States. And that provides strong evidence that soda taxes are an effective tool for encouraging healthier drinking habits with the potential to reduce sugar-linked diseases like diabetes, heart disease, and tooth decay. What's more, the bulk of Berkeley's soda tax revenue actually funds nutrition and education programs in schools and local nonprofits like the Ecology Center and the Healthy Black Families. Currently, more than 40% of this revenue goes to the Berkeley Unified School District to fund its cooking and gardening program, which further contributes to a healthier Berkeley community. Now, 40 countries around the world have soda taxes, and here in Europe, we have 9 countries that levy soda taxes. However, Spain is not included. Hopefully, with the help of sugar taxes, we can better combat obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases that bring huge threats to public health in our society. Reflecting our desired societal values and possessing the power to impact consumer behavior, there lies the beauty of taxes. Thank you.